Please take your seats. Good afternoon. I call to order the informal meeting to conduct an interactive dialogue with Ms. Maria Fernanda Espinosa, candidate for the position of the United Nations Secretary-General. Today's interactive dialogue marks a critical step in the selection and appointment process for the next Secretary-General, while also coming at a pivotal moment for the United Nations. The person we select will be more than the face of this institution. Our choice will send a powerful message about who we are and whether we truly serve all 8 billion people of the world in all their diversity. The multilateral system with the United Nations at its center is under unprecedented political and financial pressure. From a deepening liquidity crisis to fundamental principles of the UN Charter being put into question. The next Secretary-General will be entrusted not only with navigating these challenges, but also with advancing essential reforms to ensure the United Nations is fit for the future. At the same time, the world needs the United Nations more than ever, and it needs a Secretary-General who can provide strong, principled and effective leadership across all three pillars: peace and security, sustainable development, and human rights. These interactive dialogues, which I convene in line with General Assembly Resolution 79/327, offer a unique opportunity for candidates to present their vision for the future of this organization and for member states and civil society to ask questions and interact directly with candidates. The interactive dialogues are essential to ensuring a transparent and inclusive selection appointment process while underlining the important role of the General Assembly. I encourage you to make full use of this opportunity, and I thank all candidates for their active participation, member states and civil society for their questions and engagement. But these dialogues do not end in this chamber. They are also an opportunity for people around the world, the very people the United Nations serves, to listen, to engage, and to hold this process to the highest standards. For this decision does not only concern a few, but all of us in and outside the United Nations who look to this institution to reflect the principles and values it champions. As reflected in my letters dated March 4th, April 15th, and June 1st, 2026, the dialogue will begin with an introduction by the candidate of their vision and priorities for up to 10 minutes, followed by an interactive exchange. Each interactive dialogue will last up to 3 hours. The interactive exchange will take place in 2 segments. We will begin with a 1.5-hour discussion focused on leadership abilities, experience, and skills needed to lead a strong organization that is fit for the future. Following this, we will move into the second segment, which will focus on the 3 pillars of the United Nations: peace and security, sustainable development, and human rights. In line with revitalization resolutions, civil society representatives will be invited to pose questions in each of the 2 thematic segments. Before proceeding to hear the presentation of the vision of the candidate, I would like to inform members on how to inscribe to speak in the 2 thematic segments. Delegations wishing to speak can register their wish to speak by pressing the microphone button. Please do not press the microphone button yet. I will announce when delegations will be asked to press the microphone button at the beginning of the first segment. Member states speaking on behalf of groups are invited to approach the list of speakers table and will be given priority. Delegations can speak only once in each segment, whether on behalf of a group or in national capacity. In the second segment, priority will be given to delegations that did not have an opportunity to speak during the first segment. By this, I ask the last people entering the room to please take your seat. And I invite Ms. Espinosa to present her vision. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. Excellencies,
good afternoon. It's an honor to be back here at what has been my home for such a long part of my life, as a permanent representative, as Minister for Foreign Affairs, and as President of the General Assembly. This is the feeling that the 8 billion people that you represent should have, that the United Nations are their home, that they belong to all of us. So that's why I'd like to speak frankly today. Because our people feel the gaps between the promises that we make and the needs of their daily life.
As Foreign Minister of Ecuador, I hosted talks between the Colombian government and the ELN. I am also a poet, so I know words matter. They have consequences. They can provide hope, we, the peoples. But without action, words are empty. This room, the Trusteeship Council chamber, is a powerful reminder of what we can achieve when we unite around a common purpose, supporting member states on their path to peace, to sovereignty and dignity, rebuilding lives, economies, and dreams. The purposes and principles of the Charter are as relevant today as they were in 1945, perhaps even more so in this age of complexity. When hard-won progress is under threat, when our systems seem past their prime, when new challenges risk undermining cooperation, when the need has never been greater. That is why we need a UN that everyone can count on. Because no nation is immune to geopolitics and geoeconomics. No nation should bear the burden of acting alone. No nation should be excluded from the benefits that will emerge if, and only if, we work together. The need for the UN remains undeniable, yet too often the UN is missing in action or relegated to the sidelines. Too often it is slow, fragmented, and constrained. Financial pressures are not the cause. They are the consequence of deeper challenges. The UN needs to rebuild credibility and show, not just say, that it can deliver real change, be a trusted partner, and add value. I have worked across the UN's pillars and regions. I know the organization inside out, but have never been part of the UN system. I understand its strengths, constraints, and dynamics. I understand its critics. Even them believe in its huge potential. It is up to us to work together to prove the organization's value. I have presided over the most representative body in the world, this assembly. I come from the ranks of member states. I have the vision, the stamina, the conviction to serve you all with impartiality and impact. Excellencies, we cannot carry on like this. We must seize this opportunity to build a more effective and trusted UN. Too often we spend our time diagnosing the problems instead of forging solutions. I am deeply honored to be supported by Antigua and Barbuda. Like so many small states, including my own, Ecuador, they have made an outstanding contribution to the UN. A Secretary General needs to lead as well as listen. That is why, before deciding to pursue my candidacy, I listened to many of you. And after listening, my vision centers on 4 key transformations with proposals that are ready for implementation with member states' blessing, of course. First, we must act early, before crises erupt and the space for diplomacy closes. We must recenter prevention, mediation, and early action as our primary aim. We must make peace possible again. I will establish a prevention and early action hub in my office to ensure that early warnings lead to timely responses. I will work with the Security Council, the primary UN body tasked with the maintenance of peace and security. The Secretary General and her good offices must be ready to go when and where you need. And I will ensure the UN anticipates and actively manages the global fallout from conflicts, from humanitarian diplomacy, terrorism, and organized crime, to energy shocks, food insecurity, and inflation. This cannot be an afterthought. It must be embedded into our response. Second, we must deliver. The Sustainable Development Goals reflect our shared ambition, but ambition does not feed our children. It does not address debt payments and lack of concessional finance. It does not protect small islands from rising sea levels or reduce trade costs for landlocked developing countries. As Secretary General, I will work with member states to assess where progress remains possible, drawing on the UN's analytical capacities and deploying AI tools alongside the deep experience of our staff. I will champion fiscal space for national governments. The UN is not the main forum for finance, debt, or trade, but it can be better at convening and as a supporting actor. I will connect the dots between different groups and meetings, reflect the views of those not in the room, and work with all governments, north and south, east and west, to find ways to move forward. I will also consult member states on a new development approach, one that strengthens national sovereignty while rationalizing the UN's budget and bureaucracy. Development cannot be designed in New York. It must be demand-driven and nationally led. Instead of looking for funds to sustain large programs, we need to focus on a managed transition to a leaner UN that supports national actors. Third, we must leverage our convening superpower. Energy, technology, and demographic changes are reshaping our world at extraordinary pace. The UN is the only forum where all countries can come together to discuss the risks and the opportunities. I will work tirelessly to use the convening power of the UN and of the Secretary General. On energy, for example, energy issues are fragmented across the UN. I will improve energy security coordination within the UN system to support member states in addressing shocks and supply chain disruption. On technology, we should build on the Digital Compact and global dialogue on AI. The world benefits most when AI advances responsibly and fosters prosperity. The UN must support AI for the future, not the few. Fourth, we must prove our value every day. The United Nations must be judged by how many lives it saves and improves. Every reform effort, management decision, and budget discussion must be in service of peace, development, and human rights. If not, we must be brave enough to stop and change course. That will be my guiding principle, building, of course, on the UN80 process. Excellence.
Excellencies. In these complex times, we must move beyond binary thinking, secretary or general. As Chief Administrative Officer, I will strive to build a united organization, not a collection of entities competing for resources. I remain a global ambassador, facilitator, and impartial intermediary. I will serve all member states without discrimination. The Secretary General must never become the representative of a bloc, a region, or any geopolitical alignment. As As a peace builder, I will place prevention at the heart of my efforts and will strive to preserve political space for dialogue, to strengthen mediation, to support peace initiatives and blue helmets, and to ensure that the organization acts before crises escalate into conflicts and conflicts into catastrophes.
On this constrained geopolitical and financial environment, our choices can feel zero-sum. Sovereignty or cooperation, principles or pragmatism, cutting costs or saving lives. We must not give into cynicism. International law upholds sovereignty. Human rights support peace. Educating girls boosts development. There are still win-wins. We can shrink the UN responsibly while strengthening national ownership and delivery and restoring faith in the UN and, of course, in a better future. Excellencies, on this day, 15 June, the Magna Carta was sealed by England's King John. Pioneering French painter Charles de la Fosse was born. Russia made history with its Venus space probe. Benjamin Franklin's scientific discovery changed the course of the world. The Shanghai Cooperation Organization was established, and importantly, the G77 was formed. Every country brings their proud history to the United Nations. That is our strength. No Secretary General succeeds alone. The future of the UN depends on the collective commitment of member states and the dedication of its staff. I am under no illusion about the difficulties ahead. Yet I remain optimistic because I have seen what this organization can achieve and the hope it continues to inspire. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, and I look forward to continuing the conversation with you.
Thank you. I thank Ms. Espinosa. We now proceed to the first segment. Delegations wishing to speak in the first segment are invited to press the microphone button now. Members are reminded that they are encouraged to ask short and focused questions. Intervention should be not more than 2 minutes for delegations speaking in national capacity and not more than 3 minutes for delegations speaking on behalf of a group of member states. Time limits will be strictly enforced by automatic microphone cutoffs. A timer will be projected on screen. To assist speakers to observe the time limit, their microphone will start blinking 30 seconds before the time limit elapses. As indicated in my letter, after each intervention, the candidate will be given the floor to respond. The response should not be more than 2 minutes for questions from delegations speaking in national capacity and not more than 3 minutes from delegations speaking on behalf of a group of member states. I will remind candidates, I will remind you, Ms. Espinosa, of their time limits. Civil society questions will be interspersed with questions from member states. As mentioned before, we will now focus on leadership abilities, experience, and skills needed to lead a strong organization that is fit for the future. As the first speaker, I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Malawi on behalf of the African Group, followed by the European Union and the Solomon Islands.
Thank you very much, PTA. First question, I'm asking these questions on behalf of the Africa Group. Africa's exclusion from permanent membership of the Security Council reflects both a historical injustice and an ongoing structural inequity affecting decisions on issues central to the continent. What is your position on the Common Africa position, and how would you use the convening authority of the Office of the to advance intergovernmental negotiations, commitment to Security Council reform, and African permanent membership with all prerogatives and privileges? Second, taken that the Security Council has primary responsibility for the maintenance of the international peace and security, Security Council Resolution 2719 created a framework for AU-led peace support operations authorized by the Security Council to assess the contributions from the UN regular budget to ensure equitable, predictable, sustainable financing for AU peace and security officers, yet implementation has stalled. How would you approach the third-year review, and what are the options you intend to propose to ensure an appropriate operationalization of this resolution that will serve the purpose of guaranteeing sustainable financial support to AU-led PSOs instead of shifting the burden to the African Union? Third, what concrete actions would you take to advance reform of the international financial architecture, including improving African representation in international financial institutions? Fourth, how would you ensure that climate finance mechanisms, including the Loss and Damage Fund, are accessible to African countries and adequately resourced? Fifth, considering the organization's liquidity constraints, how would you safeguard development mandates and ensure sufficient funding for Africa-focused programs? Sixth, Africans remain underrepresented at senior levels. What targets would you set and what accountability mechanisms would you advise to ensure progress at P5 level and above? In my national capacity, would like to ask, what would you do to ensure that all countries in the world enjoy prosperity enshrined in the UN Charter? I thank you, Madam Espinosa. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Malawi on behalf of the African Group. Please, Ms. Espinosa.
Thank you, Madam Ambassador, for your questions on behalf of the African Union. Regarding the reform of the Security Council, we all know, especially in this House, that there is an ongoing process for several decades now entrusted to advance the reform of the Security Council. It is also a mandate enshrined in the Pact of the Future. The Secretary General's role is to ensure that it provides impartial support and Secretariat support to make sure that the process advances and that the Security Council improves its impact, its working methods, and how they tackle their main responsibility, which is to preserve peace and security and to prevent conflict. Regarding Resolution 2719, the role of the African Union and African countries in peacekeeping is well known, is one of the backbones of the operation and deployment of the peacekeeping operations of this House. I would put behind my good offices to ensure that the resolution is fully implemented and that the burden doesn't fall into the hands of the African Union. I think it is good for the effectiveness and impact of peacekeeping operation, and is good also for burden sharing into this task. The reform of international financial institutions. As mentioned in my speech, the United Nations has an irreplaceable convening role. The United Nations has the responsibility to implement the Sevilla commitment and the Sevilla platform for action. I will ensure that reform of the financial architecture takes place, discussions take place in this House, and that we provide what we are good at providing: information, advice, opinion, and political traction and legitimacy. On climate finance, you are so right. The climate finance architecture is convoluted. It poses serious difficulties for access. Not only it is insufficient, but the due diligence and the process to access the funds, I have first-hand experience, need to be rethought, need to be refurbished, and need to be facilitated for all countries to have access, especially the making operational the Loss and Damage Fund. The issue of representation of staff in the UN system. I'm already working with my team looking at what are the regions and countries that are underrepresented. This would be a priority number one when I put together my own team and I look at how to configure the whole UN system. This organization should be the mirror of the societies and the countries that we work for. Diversity, geographical representation, and equity would be the principles that guide the configuration of the staff of the UN.
I thank Ms. Espinosa. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the European Union on behalf of the EU and its member states, followed by the Solomon Islands and Uruguay.
Thank you, Madam President, and thank you, Ms. Espinosa, for being here with us today. At this critical juncture, the next Secretary General must build trust, reduce polarization, bridge divides, accelerate UN reforms, and deliver solutions that make a real difference in people's lives on the ground. He or she must also be fully prepared to defend and promote full respect for the UN Charter and international law and all three UN pillars equally. The EU's support to the UN reflects precisely that premise. On peace and security, we actively advance the implementation of key UN mandates through our security and defense missions around the world. On sustainable development, we are committed to safeguarding the SDGs and battling inequality, also by providing close to 50% of all official development assistance and over 1/3 of all voluntary contributions to the UN system. And on human rights, we are committed to protecting and defending all human rights, civil and political, economic, social and cultural, with equal vigor. We are therefore deeply concerned with recent normative attacks on human rights, including on women's and girls' full enjoyment of human rights and on gender equality, as well as racial, religious, political and other forms of discrimination and persecution. We also note that, remarkably, only 1% of the UN system spending is dedicated to human rights mandates, in a glaring imbalance between the three UN pillars. Against this backdrop, we wish to ask the following questions. Would you agree that the promotion and protection of all human rights, with individuals as rights holders, is indispensable both in their own right and to achieve peace and security and sustainable development as well? From your knowledge and experience, can you offer a concrete example where the protection of human rights has boosted sustainable development or peace and security, or where the violation of human rights has regressed sustainable development or peace and security? And finally, as Secretary General, how do you plan to protect and increase the funding of the human rights pillar, as explicitly mandated in the Pact for the Future? Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of the European Union on behalf of the EU and its member states. Please, Ms. Espinosa.
Thank you, Ambassador. This is a very pertinent question because human rights is indeed the third pillar of the work of this organization. It is enshrined in the Charter. It is a mandate that we have as an organization. You asked about a good example where peace can foster human rights and vice versa. My first comment is that we need in this House to look at the three pillars of the Charter as mutually reinforcing from a holistic approach. We know that there is no peace without development, and there is no development without human rights and peace. They are closely interconnected and closely interdependent. About the question, I was thinking, for example, during the first phase of the peace process in Colombia, the immediate dividend of peace in Colombia was the inclusion of former armed groups into development, into even politics. into political participation. The inclusion of the people that were in arms had a tremendous impact, not only in establishing peace, but in improving social cohesion. This is a very specific example just next door from our country, and that I know from close, I know closely. Your question about the issue of the budget on human rights. Some say it is 1%. I have been looking at the numbers. It's a little more, but what is obvious, that is really not enough. What I can tell you is that, first of all, as Secretary General, my responsibility is to ensure that every action, every agency, every program, every country team deliver on human rights. And human rights and human dignity is at the center of everything we do. The work of the UN should be a work that cares about human dignity and where human beings are at the center. So that is a direct responsibility of the Secretariat. Regarding the overall budget of the organization, I also believe, looking at the structure, at the apparatus on human rights. I was ambassador in Geneva, I was ambassador here. The tension, the overlaps, the duplication of the work is something that I will be ready and at your disposal to look at how we can improve the structure, improve the way we deliver, and improve the impact we have. Again, as I mentioned, the work of the organization is to place human dignity at the center.
I thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Solomon Islands on behalf of the Pacific Islands Forum.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam Espinosa, I have the honor to address you today on behalf of the members of the Pacific Islands Forum, represented with the presence in New York. We thank the President of the General Assembly for this valuable opportunity to engage directly with all candidates for the Secretary General. The Pacific region faces many challenges, some shared by members across this Assembly, others unique to our region. In confronting these challenges, we draw on our strengths, including a commitment to working together through the Pacific Islands Forum to deliver for our people. But no challenge is more pressing than climate change, which will disproportionately imperil the lives, livelihoods, security, and well-being of Pacific people. Secretary General Guterres' visit to our region helped him to appreciate the gravity of this threat and to mobilize international attention. It also allowed him to appreciate the region's leadership and to hear firsthand from our communities on the work they are doing to bolster resilience. During his 2024 visit to Tonga for the Pacific Islands Forum, the Secretary General described the Pacific region as, and I quote, a beacon of solidarity and strength, environmental stewardship, and peace. The Pacific and the UN have a long history of collaboration, and we want to ensure that this partnership continues and is prioritized under UN's new leadership. We have two questions. First, how would you use the Office of the Secretary General to draw attention and mobilize action to address the unique vulnerabilities of small island developing states, including Pacific SIDS, in particular the impacts of climate change? And second, the UN is often pulled towards crises that dominate headlines, while other realities unfold more slowly with irreversible consequences. How will you balance urgent conflicts with the impacts of climate change? What criteria will guide your decisions on where attention and political capital will be directed? I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of the Solomon Islands on behalf of the Pacific Islands Forum. Please, Ms. Espinosa.
Thank you. Thank you to the Pacific Island Forum. Thank you, Excellency. You said it so well. Climate change is existential for small island developing states. Climate shocks, I have seen it firsthand, can destroy lives, livelihoods, entire GDPs in 24 hours after a hurricane, after a big flood. This is not distant from me. And what you're asking is, we need to speed up climate action. We need to meet the commitments that we have already made. When I communicate to the outside world and I receive questions, you have already met for 30 times. We are soon approaching COP31, and yet emissions continue to grow. This is a huge debt of humanity, and it is also a debt of co-responsibility and solidarity with small island developing states. As Secretary General, I will be reassured that I will be a great advocate, a great supporter. I will keep the climate agenda as one of the priorities. In concrete terms, I believe that the multidimensional vulnerability index is going to help countries like the SEEDs, but other vulnerable countries, for speedy access to climate funds. In what you said, we focus on urgent conflicts, and we do not focus on the climate shocks that countries are experiencing. I have to say that in terms of urgency and emergency, climate change is here. Climate change is affecting our horizons and commitments to development, is expanding inequalities, is destroying our infrastructure, is threatening our energy security as we speak. So this is of utmost priority. You will count on me as your big advocate, and I will bring my 15 years of experience as a climate negotiator to the House. Thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Uruguay on behalf of the Group of 77 and China, followed by the First Civil Society Organization and Singapore.
Thank you, Madam President. We thank you for convening this meeting, and it's a pleasure to see Ms. Espinosa present her position, and we'll now read our questions in English for the Group of 77 and China.
The Group of G77 and China attach a great importance to the selection and appointment of the Secretary General and reaffirm the need to ensure that this process remains open, transparent, and inclusive in accordance with the relevant General Assembly resolutions. Here the question. 1. With reference to the UN80 initiative introduced by the Secretary General Antonio Guterres, what is your assessment of the proposal? And how do you believe it could advance a United Nations that is more effective, efficient, and deliver greater impact on the ground? How would you ensure that any related reform fully respect the intergovernmental nature of the United Nations, preserve the balance among its three pillars, and do not come at the expenses of the development mandate or priorities of developing countries? Question number 2. With the 2030 deadline fast approaching, how would you ensure the full and timely implementation of the Agenda for Sustainable Development, bearing in mind the universality and indivisibility of the goal and target, the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities, and the commitment to leave no one behind? Specifically, how do you envisage the role of the Secretary General and the United Secretariat in advancing this objective? Question number 3. If you were appointed as Secretary General, how would you ensure equal and fair distribution based on gender and geopolitical balance, and prescribe the Article 101 of the Charter and the relevant General Assembly resolution, particularly in terms of the overall increase in the representation and underrepresented countries, especially from development countries at the senior level appointment within the UN Secretariat and broader UN system? Question number 4. At the time of the shrinking fiscal space, declining ODA, rising debt burdens, and widening development gaps, how would you, as Secretary General, mobilize the United Nations system to defend and advance the development pillar, accelerate implementation of the 2030 Agenda, and support the finances for development in manner fully responsive to the priorities of developing countries? In light of the organization's persistent liquidity crisis, including warning of the potential race to bankruptcy, What concrete measure would you, as Secretary General, undertake to promote compliance and the member state financial obligation, ensure that the assessed contributions are paid in full, on time, and without conditions? As a final reflection,
Thank you. Thank you. Ms. Espinosa.
Well, I had difficulties just writing down also. But thank you to the G77, and I have to say I feel extremely proud to have chaired the group myself and my country. So I think that the questions are very, very pertinent. To the point, UN80 and the assessment of the process. I have followed closely the discussions on the implementation of the UN80 reform, the 3 pillars. I would say in a shorthand, I think that the whole reform has to be deeply consulted and in the hands of member states. I am very pleased to see, for example, the advancement of Pillar 2, the review process of the mandate review process in the hands of 2 very able co-chairs. I have seen already progress in Pillar 1 in rationalization. I would call it an inevitable pillar because we are, we are facing a liquidity challenge in the House. And on the 3rd pillar, which is more structural, I am also observing the exchanges. I will take the temperature, consult with member states. In some of the consultations I have made, some member states think that the 3rd pillar should also be subject to an intergovernmental process. But what you can expect from me that I will closely consult with member states, advance the implementation of the UN80 reform process, because it is important to have an organization that is leaner, that is more impact-driven, and that is more modern and responds to the needs of the people of today. On the SDGs, the SDGs are the right ambition, the right direction of travel. What we have seen, unfortunately, I don't need to tell this House, there is a problem if after all these years, since 2015, we are able to have 18% of the goals on track. So there is a lot of G in the SDGs, but very little D, very little development. So I think that we need, first of all, to accelerate pace in what we can implement realistically. And I am ready to work side by side you to think in a realistic yet, with great vision on what could be a framework that doesn't need to start January 1st, 2031, but needs to start now. Development, as I mentioned, cannot be designed in New York. It has to be owned locally. It has to respect the sovereignty of states, and the responsibility of this House and of the Secretary General is to ensure that countries have 3 things, which are the enablers. The money, and that goes through the reform of the international financial architecture. In the second phase, I hope I will be able to expand on what are the issues that are important as we reform the international financial architecture and the role of the UN on this. They need an energy and technology transition, and they need the institutional capacity. You can count on me to think through this new phase of development, this new framework of development, and accelerate pace as we implement the SDG framework for 2030. The issue of representation of staff, I run out of time. Representation of staff and the financial crisis of the UN, I promise I will pick in the other questions, and the second part of this dialogue, I promise I will respond, because there are 2 very important aspects for this dialogue and for the UN, of course.
Thank you, and there will be many more, and also for the other questions. Thank you very much. I now invite the Assembly to view a pre-recorded video by Soroptimist, the first civil society organization.
Excellencies, dear colleagues, if a permanent member of the Security Council withholds assessed contributions as a political instrument, what specific tools within your authority as Secretary General would you deploy?
Thank you. Short and sharp. Ms. Espinosa.
Well, thank you to the question of Soroptimist International, and it fits very well to the question asked already by the G77. We know, and you know better than I do, that the organization is undergoing a liquidity crisis. There is a lack of cash in the house. I mentioned in my opening speech that it is not because the world lacks resources. There is plenty of money out there. So I think there has to be harmony between the political decision of the UN to reform, to improve the way it delivers, to be leaner, to be impact-oriented, to be more transparent and more accountable, and at the same time, having the strength, the power, the traction, and the legitimacy, and here I'm speaking about the role of the Secretary General, to put all her good offices to make sure that countries pay in full and on time. This is absolutely important. I have been looking at the numbers, at the countries that unfortunately have not honored their financial responsibilities, and I think that renewed leadership can help push the envelope on that. Of course, the number one task and responsibility, I will assume, as your Secretary General, is to ensure that we have a balanced, sustainable, and predictable budget. This is absolutely imperative for the well-functioning of the House, and I think it's an issue of co-responsibility, of mutual commitment, and also to ensure that countries that are contributing to the UN can see value for money. That would be my response, and thank you again.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Singapore on behalf of the Small States Group, followed by the Republic of Korea and Myanmar. And Poland.
Thank you very much, Madam President. I have the honor indeed to deliver this statement on behalf of the Small States Group, SSG, which is a cross-regional grouping of small states comprising both developed and developing countries. The list of countries that have aligned with the statement will be made available after this meeting. Madam President, we are living in a volatile and dangerous period in international relations characterized by geopolitical tension and conflict. For small states, an effective multilateral system founded on the principles of the UN Charter and international law is not an option but an existential necessity. The next Secretary General will play a critical role not only in defending the UN Charter but also in reinvigorating and reshaping the role and relevance of the United Nations. We look to the Secretary General to safeguard the interests of all member states, especially the interests of the smallest, weakest, and most vulnerable members of the UN. We do not want a world of might is right, where international law and the sovereignty and territorial integrity of small states are violated with impunity. The members of the SSG stand ready to work with the next Secretary General and with all member states to strengthen the role of the UN and to defend international law and multilateralism. In the interest of brevity, I'll go directly to the question. First, what steps will you take to strengthen the role of the General Assembly, especially at a time when the Security Council has been unable to take decisive action? And related to this, how will you support and strengthen the office of the President of the General Assembly? Secondly, the SDGs and the Pact for the Future are landmark outcome documents. They provide a roadmap for global action and partnership. How will you accelerate the implementation of the SDGs and the Pact for the Future? And a third and last question. We are at a critical moment when public perception of the United Nations seems to have become critical and even cynical in many countries. How do you plan to galvanize support for the work of the UN, especially among younger people who represent the future in all our societies? Thank you very much.
I thank the distinguished representative of Singapore on behalf of the Small States Group. Please, Ms. Espinosa.
Thank you, Ambassador, and thank you to the Small States Group. You mentioned that for the group, the importance of the UN is existential. And I agree. I think the importance of the UN is existential and universal. And I have to say, perhaps a comment, I have observed the work of the Small States Group. And what I see is that creativity, commitment to multilateralism, constructive engagement is what we can expect from your group. And that speaks volumes about the importance and contributions of small states. I mentioned that also in my speech. It also means that greatness is not measured in square kilometers. And I fully believe that coming from the country I come from. Your question is about how to strengthen the General Assembly, Madam President. And here you touch on something that is very dear to me. Not only I was the President of the General Assembly, and I understand that the office of the President of the General Assembly needs to be strengthened. A greater institutional memory, a greater capacity of a greater consideration of the stature of the office and the needs that the office has to deliver its mandate. I also recall when I was ambassador in New York, I was the co-facilitator of the revitalization process. So I'm very well informed. I understand that the role of the General Assembly is absolutely vital. The General Assembly, I see it as this parliament of nations with a great responsibility, is the muscle of legitimacy and representation of this House. So you can count on me to provide all the Secretariat's support to ensure that we serve the Office of the President and all the needs of the General Assembly. In terms of implementation of the Pact of the Future and the SDGs, I mentioned already how important it is. The Pact of the Future was agreed by this House. It is a comprehensive roadmap for reform. I will work tirelessly to make sure that the review of the Pact of the Future in 2028 takes place not only as a bureaucratic moment, but really look at how much we have advanced in implementation. SDGs, I mentioned already how important it is not only to speed up and fast-track implementation until 2030, but start to design a post-2030 framework, not in 2030, but now and hand in hand with all of you. The issue of public perception, my time is over, and I promise I will come back to the need to rethink how the UN communicates, engages, and translates the work it does to the people we are called to serve, how we connect with the peoples in the work we do. Thank you, Ambassador.
Thank you very much. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Republic of Korea, also speaking on behalf of Egypt, Myanmar, Norway, and Peru, followed by Poland and Luxembourg.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you, Madam Espinosa, for joining us today. I have the honor to deliver these questions on behalf of Egypt, Myanmar, Norway, Peru, and Republic of Korea, member states whose nationals have served as a Secretary General of the United Nations. Drawing on our experience and institutional memory, we wish to contribute constructively to the current selection process and stand ready to support the both process itself and the next Secretary General. The responsibilities entrusted to Secretary General under the Charter are profound, while the Charter designated the Secretary General as the Chief Administrative Officer of the organization. It also assigned the office an independent political role in the maintenance of international peace and security. As conflicts continue to unfold across the globe and the calls for reform grow ever stronger, the United Nations require a Secretary General who can successfully navigate both political and managerial dimensions of the role, equal parts diplomat and advocate, civil servant, and CEO. As countries whose nationals have served as Secretary General, our questions are, first, the Office of the Secretary General frequently requires difficult judgment between principle and pragmatism, public advocacy and quiet diplomacy, action and restraint. Can you please share how your professional experience have prepared you in making such decisions? And what guiding principles would you inform your leadership as Secretary General? Second, looking at the on-the-job experience of previous Secretary General, what lessons do you believe remain most relevant for the next Secretary General? And in my national capacity, I'd like to add one more question. At a time when the international community's attention is increasingly pulled in multiple directions, how can the UN ensure that long-standing challenges to peace and security, including those on the Korean Peninsula, receive the sustained and consistent engagement they demand? Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of the Republic of Korea on behalf of a group of states. Please, Ms. Espinosa.
Thank you, Excellency, and to the group of countries that you represent in your questions. Your question about what is the experience that I will bring to the position. I feel a little hesitant to speak about what I bring, but what I bring here is my experience as foreign minister, as Minister of Defense, as President of this House, as I would call an experience of 360 degrees of all the three pillars of the organization, as a negotiator, as a mediator, and as coming as being an insider, outsider, but with a strong conviction that the UN is irreplaceable and that we can do better, and we can do better together. The lessons, I have to say that each one of the Secretary Generals, they operate in a very particular geopolitical context. They all bring their leadership style and personality, and I can only say that you have experience being the ambassador of Korea. You know what a good leadership can bring to the House. What are the lessons learned? The lessons learned, I would say, in my experience as PGA, rule number one, an open door policy, to be able to speak to every member state, to be available 24/7, to be seen, because a trust is not declared, it's earned, to be seen as an impartial owner's broker. I will be impartial to member states, but I will be partial to one thing, partial to uphold the Charter and to uphold international law. Regarding your question on the Korean Peninsula, this is a conflict that is there. It doesn't make headlines sometimes, but it's absolutely important that this House engages in every effort that is geared towards peacemaking and stability in a very important region as the Korean Peninsula. Thank you, Excellency.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Poland on behalf of the Lublin Triangle Group.
Thank you, Madam President. I deliver this statement on behalf of the Lublin Triangle, Lithuania, Ukraine, and my country, Poland. Madam Espinosa, Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine has produced documented patterns of atrocity crimes, including deportation of children, attacks on civilian infrastructure and cultural heritage, just like night, and arbitrary of detention. In this context, existing UN mechanisms have proven unable to compel accountability. This is why we believe that we need a leadership for accountability, and we believe it might come from the new Secretary General. So that come my questions. First, what is your vision for strengthening coordination between the Security Council, the ICC, the General Assembly, and fact-finding mechanisms to ensure that impunity does not become a default outcome? Secondly, from your experience, how should the new Secretary General strengthen cooperation with existing international and national investigative mechanisms to support the impartial documentation, preservation and verification of evidence of war crimes and other serious violations committed by Russia in Ukraine, while ensuring consistent UN system-wide reporting and response, including efforts to advance accountability for crime of aggression? And as a leader, what concrete role should the Secretary General's good offices play in ensuring the implementation of General Assembly mandates, such as the resolution Return of the Ukrainian Children from December 2025, and advancing accountability with when a permanent member of the Security Council is alleged perpetrator? Thank you, Madam.
Thank you. Please, Ms. Espinosa.
Thank you. Thank you for the question to the Lublin Triangle Group. I strongly believe that the United Nations must continue to support, of course, international law, the UN Charter, the independent work of the mechanisms established by member states. But the Security Council has a responsibility to uphold the principles on which the organization was founded, including, as mentioned, the respect for international law and accountability for violations when competent institutions determine that they have occurred. At the same time, the Secretary General, you mentioned what is the role of the Secretary General, has a unique responsibility to maintain constant channels of dialogue, exercise good offices, support every credible effort to reduce suffering in advance peace. My approach as Secretary General, therefore, would be guided by three principles: the respect of international law, the support for accountability mechanisms established by member states, and an unwavering commitment to dialogue and the peaceful resolution of conflicts. I believe that the United Nations must continue to work towards that. And I'm fully committed to renew and revamp the role of the Secretary General as a peacemaker and as an advocate for peace.
Thank you. Before giving the floor to the next speaker, I would like to remind speakers that I know the microphone cutoff is hard, but we still need to translate the questions and comments, so please also have that in mind when asking your questions. As the next speaker, I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Luxembourg on behalf of the Benelux countries, followed by the next civil society organization.
Thank you very much, Madam President, and I thank Mrs. Espinosa for sharing her vision with us today. I indeed speak on behalf of the Benelux, a long-standing regional partnership comprising Belgium, the Kingdom of the Netherlands, and my own country, Luxembourg. We subscribe to the statement of the European Union. We consider that the UN needs, above all, a Secretary General with proven leadership and reform credentials, capable of guiding a complex organization in a time of geopolitical tension and financial pressure. We attach particular importance to a Secretary General who can strengthen trust in multilateralism and the international legal order, who can act as a strong convening power across all three pillars, and who can proactively contribute to prevention, peacebuilding, and mediation. At the same time, we see a need to strengthen the UN's financial sustainability, accountability, and system-wide coherence, and we place high value on leadership that can connect the UN's development work with broader efforts on peace, security, and human rights, particularly in times of systematic stress. Mrs. Espinosa, we have two questions. First, drawing on your proposal to establish a prevention and early action hub reporting directly to your office, how would you ensure that the UN plays a more integrated role across the three pillars? Specifically, how would you operationalize this hub so that early warning, political engagement, and UN country team support are better aligned, and the organization can act earlier and more coherently to prevent conflict and sustain peace? And secondly, could you share your thinking on the composition of your senior leadership team, including the Deputy Secretary General. How would you approach considerations such as regional balance, gender, and the specific qualities needed to support your priorities if selected as Secretary General? I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Luxembourg on behalf of the Benelux countries. Please, Ms. Espinosa.
Well, thank you for the question, Excellency, and to the Benelux group. And I really thank you for having read the vision statement that I put forward in my proposal to establish a prevention and early action hub. I use deliberately the word hub because I really don't want to give the impression that it's going to be a superstructure of more bureaucracy. It's going to be drawing in the knowledge and wisdom of the House, and it is intended to be a 24/7 task force that would use the analytical capacity, the prospective capacity of the House, the ability to identify red flags and early warning, to inform and advise the Secretary General on time so she can act and respond early. And when she acts and responds early, obviously, it's for the Secretary General to immediately advise and inform member states, in particular the members of the Security Council, but also to exercise and respond immediately and on time with shuttle diplomacy. And I am a big believer of shuttle diplomacy, of being there, foot on the ground, before crises occur and crises become catastrophes with no return. So this is going to be an installed capacity in my office with the existing resources, but operating in emergency mode 24/7. And I think the world of today really needs that. Your second question was regarding the issue of how to bring together the three pillars. The delivering as one. When I was ambassador here, it was the moment of the one UN and delivering as one. But I think we need to do more work on that. We need more consistency, more coherence, a culture of cooperation within the UN system. We need the right incentives to evaluate the effectiveness of our work on not how much a particular agency has fundraised or the head of such agency and country team has appeared in the newspaper of the day. I have also experience on that, is how many lives we have saved, how many children we have protected, how much we have helped a country to strengthen their planning capacity. These are the right incentives to really delivering as one. For that, we need to change something that is very difficult but not impossible. Having reformed the armed forces of my country, I can tell you, which is the institutional culture. When I have time, I would like to share some of my thinking about how to deal with accountability and better monitoring and evaluation for the House, because I ran out of time. But excellent questions. Thank you to Benelux.
Thank you very much. I now give the floor to the next civil society organization, Medical Impact. Please, you have the floor.
Chair, Ms. Espinosa, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, and colleagues. My name is Armando Acolsi from Mexico, and I have been following global policy from the very front lines we work in with Medical Impact, helping connect the voiceless to this space of decision-making. In this context, informal consultation of the negotiation of the United Nations, political declaration and ministerial declarations are formally limited to the participation of member states, resulting in the structural exclusion of civil society voices from these processes. Ms. Espinosa, if elected Secretary General, what measures would you propose to ensure that civil society organizations with consultative status are able to meaningfully contribute to such informal consultations while preserving the intergovernmental nature of the negotiations?
Thank you. Please.
Thank you very, very much for that question. I think I see the role of civil society as fundamental to the work of the organization. Civil society not only as with the responsibility to do oversight, to monitor and ensure that the UN implements its commitments, and the Secretariat has also to be accountable to the people it serves, so in terms of monitoring and oversight, but also a wealth of intellect, of first-hand experience, of contributing to the substance, advising the work of the organization, as you said very well, preserving the intergovernmental nature of the United Nations. So welcome for the interest. I think civil society has also a very important role to play in responding to the question of FOSS, of the Small Island States Forum, in translating the work of the UN to civil society. You have to be ambassadors and interpreters of the work of the organization to the outside world and the communities you work with. So absolutely important. I have seen the enormous constructive role of civil society, for example, in the process of the negotiation of the Pact of the Future, following the negotiations on climate, the role, the voice of civil society has always been extremely important, and it will continue to be. Of course, intergovernmental negotiations and the role each government provides to civil society is in the hands of member states.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Palau on behalf of the Alliance of Small Island States, followed by St. Kitts and Nevis and Andorra.
Madam President, thank you for convening this important dialogue, and I thank Madam Espinosa for your interaction with us today. I have the honor to speak on behalf of the 39 members of the Alliance of Small Island States, AOSIS. As a group of countries in special situations, the credibility of the United Nations lies in its ability to respond to the unique circumstances of SIDS, correct long-standing inequities, and deliver results for the most vulnerable. In this regard, allow me to pose the following questions. First, how will you, as Secretary General, ensure that the United Nations is more accessible, better coordinated, and tailored to the unique vulnerabilities of SIDS to better and more meaningfully support the full implementation of the Antigua and Barbuda Agenda for SIDS? Second, how will you use your leadership to accelerate global ambition and action on climate change, particularly to keep 1.5 within reach, and while ensuring that SIDS receive scaled up, predictable and accessible finance for adaptation, mitigation, and loss and damage in line with international commitments? And finally, what specific measures will you take to improve on the underrepresentation of SIDS within the United Nations Secretariat, especially at senior leadership levels? And how will you strengthen the pathways for SIDS nationals to shape decision-making across the United Nations? Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Palau on behalf of the Alliance of Small Island States, please.
Thank you to Palau for the questions on behalf of the SIDS. Basically, how would I support the implementation of the Antigua and Barbuda agenda? I think that considering the country that has nominated me, which is Antigua and Barbuda, my full commitment to champion the implementation of the Antigua and Barbuda agenda. Of course, I fully understand what are the challenges of small island developing states, its particular vulnerabilities in terms of climate, in terms of access to finance. If the financial architecture needs to be reformed, is precisely because of the particular needs you have. To access resources that are concessional, that take into account the different vulnerabilities, to reduce the due diligence processes, to redefine the obstacles of how risk is perceived. So I fully understand. And even though the Galapagos Islands are not an independent country because they belong to Ecuador, my country, I was the president of the Governing Council of the Galapagos Islands, and I understand exactly what is the challenge between conservation, development, climate resilience, access to affordable finance, debt service, and here I want to say that debt restructuring is something that is of utmost importance, not only for seeds, but for developing countries, for middle-income countries, absolutely vital. Even though the UN cannot do it by itself, the Secretary General and this House, they are called to provide the platform, to provide the intelligence, the data, the political traction, and the legitimacy to bring the conversation to this House. As per climate finance, I have also seen how scattered, how complicated the architecture of climate finance has become. What I can say is that we need to rebalance investment in adaptation that receive very little money. Most of the investment goes to mitigation, and we need, as mentioned before, to make the loss and damage fund fully operational and accessible for countries with special vulnerabilities, particularly to the small island developing states. On representation of staff, I mentioned that I am already looking at countries that are underrepresented, and that can be fixed. It's of course, a management decision, and I'm fully committed to make sure that the staff of the UN reflects the diversity of the world that we serve.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of St. Kitts and Nevis on behalf of the Caribbean community, followed by Andorra.
Thank you, Madam President. I have the honor to speak on behalf of the 14 member states of the Caribbean community, CARICOM. At the outset, CARICOM congratulates Ms. Espinosa on her nomination to become the next Secretary General of the United Nations. CARICOM acknowledges your experience in the international system and commends your willingness to offer yourself in service to the international community at this important juncture. CARICOM also thanks you for the presentation of your vision for your anticipated tenure as the Secretary General of the United Nations. Ms. Espinosa, CARICOM has 4 questions that it would like to ask you. First, with reference to the Antigua and Barbuda Agenda for Small Island Developing States, the ABAS, and the need to ensure adequate follow-up and implementation for this plan, alongside the development of the post-2030 agenda, what are your perspectives on the role of the UN Secretary General in maintaining focused, systematic support for the ABAS? Second, CARICOM is of the view that the United Nations is the most representative multilateral forum, and that the Secretariat should reflect the diversity of the organization in an equitable manner. What are your plans to target nationals from unrepresented and underrepresented countries to access more opportunities to increase their representation, especially at professional and higher levels in the Secretariat? Third, with the recent adoption of the Pact of the Future, member states made commitments to strengthen multilateralism and accelerate the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals, while taking into account the needs and interests of future generations. The Declaration of the Future Generations specifically marked an important normative achievement as it encouraged longer-term decision-making, including through the use of foresight, anticipatory planning, data, and science, to allow for better decisions to be made not only for the present generation, but for those who will follow us. As Secretary General, how will you ensure that future generations' considerations are integrated across the UN system, and how do you see this agenda moving forward in practice? And finally, could you elaborate on any specific plans you have to further strengthen the collaboration between the Office of the Secretary General and the Security Council for conflict prevention and resolution? Thank you, Madam President.
I thank the distinguished representative of St. Kitts and Nevis on behalf of CARICOM. Please, Ms. Espinosa.
Thank you to St. Kitts and Nevis and to the CARICOM. Regarding the implementation of ABAS, of course, that is a front and center of the priorities of the House, and it will be the same in my office, as mentioned before. It, of course, is of vital importance. We already mentioned the special needs, the vulnerabilities, but also the very important contribution of small island developing states in general and the CARICOM to a strong multilateral system that delivers. In terms of diversity representation in the UN system, I mentioned that and I will repeat. I'm already looking at the map, at the presence of every country of the system in the staff. I mentioned that it will be a priority to make sure that this organization reflects every region and the diversity of its membership at all levels of leadership. Regarding the Pact of the Future, thank you for mentioning the Declaration of Future Generations. I would confess that in the package of the Pact of the Future, the Digital Compact and this declaration, I think the declaration should be more than rhetoric. It really requires, as you mentioned very well, to improve the ability and the capacity of this House for foresight, anticipatory planning and commitments and policy, but it really means that we have to think the way we imagine development, we look at the future, we look at peace from the lens not only of today and the immediate future, but from a cross-generational perspective. That requires a building technical capacity that I am sure the House already, has, and it requires that we work together to understand an issue of responsibility with future generations. I thank you for bringing that to the table because it is of extreme importance and relevance, especially when we think, for example, about environmental integrity, the crisis of pollution, the future that we're going to leave future generations. It is a very important matter. Thank you. Thank you again to CARICOM. And over your question, is not that I forgot, but my time is up right now. I will use the incoming questions now to address your question about the coordination of the Office of the Secretary General with the Security Council. Thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Andorra on behalf of the group of La Francophonie ambassadors, followed by Saudi Arabia.
On behalf of the group of Francophone ambassadors, I would like to commend, Madam President, the convening of this interactive dialogue. I'd like to thank you, Ms. Espinosa, for setting out your strategic vision at a time when the United Nations must tackle systemic crises as well as growing fragmentation we're witnessing in the international order. It seems that multilingualism is not a secondary issue. It's a strategic lever which can be used to bolster the legitimacy, effectiveness, and credibility of the multilateral system, as well as its inclusivity. We'd like to hear your personal position and your capacity to respond to this challenge at various levels. We have 4 questions, in fact. Could you clarify your relationship to the UN working languages, in particular French, as well as the place that multilingualism holds in your employment history? Second, as an SG, how would you use multilingualism to structure your mandate, not relegating it to simply a functional tool? 3, how will you ensure that your leadership team reflects regional, cultural, and linguistic diversity, characteristic of the United Nations? And last but not least, regarding your responsibility for Secretariat governance, how do you plan to make changes to human resource management practices to ensure that linguistic competencies are fully recognized and made the most of in recruitment and career progression, in keeping with the need for linguistic diversity in the Secretariat? I thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Ms. Espinosa.
Merci beaucoup, Andorra.
Thank you very much, Andorra. Thank you for that question on the topic of multilingualism. your question on my relationship with the UN's working languages. Well, first and foremost, I believe I speak Spanish rather well. It is my mother tongue after all. French is my second language. I had the privilege of being educated in French, as you know, and English is a working language for me. On top of that, I am staunchly convinced that the topic of multilingualism is not a secondary issue. It is a central issue which is linked to the principle of sovereign equality of states. What's more is, multilingualism is a source of wealth. It enriches multilateral discussions, multilateral work. A language is not just a way of expressing ourselves. It also encapsulates diplomatic traditions, cultural diversity. It is a source of enrichment for the multilateral system. Thus, for me, this topic is going to be an overarching priority. I am going to strive to ensure that this House, the United Nations, remains a multilingual house, that the organization's working languages are respected. Furthermore, I will endeavor to ensure that my team reflects this linguistic diversity. And without a doubt, I will be working closely with the Human Resources Department to ensure that linguistic skills are factored in at the recruitment stage and also later on when United Nations staff are assessed and evaluated. Thank you so much for this question. As you know, this issue is very close to my heart, and it will be one of my priorities.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Saudi Arabia on behalf of the Arab Group.
Allow me to thank you, Madam President, for holding this important meeting, which allows us to get familiarized with the vision of Ms. Espinosa, SG candidate. It is my honor to deliver the statement on behalf of the Arab Group. The Arab Group stresses its readiness to work constructively with SG candidates to enhance the role of the UN and its ability to address international challenges and to consolidate the principles of the Charter and to achieve international peace and security and sustainable development. The Arab Group would like to pose the following questions. First, in light of the differences in implementing international law around the world, how can we ensure consistency and non-selectivity in addressing the different crises to ensure the credibility of the multilateral system and to ensure the equitable implementation of international standards? Second, what would be your role in enhancing the effectiveness of the UN and the complementarity of its role regarding the Palestinian question to ensure the consistent implementation of relevant resolutions and ensure the durable and just peace in the region? Third, over the past few years, we've seen escalations and crises. We've seen increasing challenges to respecting international law and the Charter of the United Nations. How can we enhance ways to comply with these principles, especially in the humanitarian field? And how can we enhance the role of UN entities, especially UNRWA? Fourth, regarding the current liquidity crises and declining funding available for humanitarian action and increasing debt burdens, how are you going to work on enhancing the role of the United Nations in consolidating the development agenda, the 2030 development agenda, and respond to the financing needs of developing states? Finally, how will you assess the goals of UN 80 initiative? How can it be implemented without adversely affecting the main mandates adopted by the United Nations? I thank you, Madam President.
I thank the distinguished representative of Saudi Arabia on behalf of the Arab group. Many questions again. We see how many fit in the 3 minutes answering time. I would like to also raise your attention that 1.5 hours have passed, so we've exhausted the allotted time for the first segment. While there is still interest from member states to speak on the first segment, in the interest of time, I invite delegation to proceed to the second segment, as some of you have done already, speaking and focusing especially on the 3 pillars of the United Nations: peace and security, development, and human rights. And as before, civil society questions will be interspersed with questions from member states. Ms. Espinosa, please.
Well, thank you to the Arab group and to you, Excellency, for your questions. Your question about the issue of stability in the Middle East. I think that the essential point there is that the UN must always keep political solutions alive, even in the most difficult moments. I think that lasting peace requires, in the case of the Middle East, security for Israel, as well as self-determination and statehood for Palestine, and of course the protection of civilians in all sides. You mentioned what is the role of the Secretary General. My response to that, a very important question, is that I will support implementation of the 2 parallel tracks that we have in hand, both the General Assembly track, supporting the implementation of the New York Declaration and the respective resolution of September 2025, but also the Security Council track, supporting the implementation of Resolution 2803. I think that these 2 tracks must not compete. They must reinforce each other. And as Secretary General, that should be my role, that they converge and they work hand in hand. You also asked the question about UNRWA. And I think that the role of international humanitarian law must be respected and upheld in all circumstances. Humanitarian access, civilian protection, the safety of humanitarian personnel are legal and moral obligations of this House. Concretely on your question of UNRWA, I think it's important to recall that the mandate of UNRWA does not come from the Secretary General. It comes from member states through the General Assembly. It's a subsidiary body of the General Assembly. And I am aware that last year the General Assembly renewed UNRWA's mandate for an additional 3 years. As Secretary General, my role would be to ensure that the organization implements its mandate effectively, transparently, and independently. And you also called for the need to have a Secretary General that is impartial and independent. That would be the case for this particular situation. I'm about to run out of time. You mentioned your questions about the shortage of funding for the humanitarian work of the UN. Here, when you say humanitarian work, the first thing that comes to mind is the hundreds of humanitarian workers that have lost their lives in the past months. And I cannot just, go without saying, my full solidarity with their families. And sometimes behind a number of statistics, there is a human being and a family. You would say, I run out of time to answer this question, but what we need to do, I have read carefully the humanitarian reset scheme, the proposal of a humanitarian group, and I hope I will have the time to express what are my views to both. I think they're very good starting points. I would also complete my answer regarding the liquidity crisis and implementation of the SDGs. Thank you, Excellency, for your questions.
Thank you very much. We have many more speakers on the list, so I would like to ask really to stick to the speaking times. I know it's very short, but the rules of procedure are the same for all candidates. I would like to give the floor now to the next speaker, the distinguished representative of Nepal on behalf of the least developed countries, followed by Austria and Estonia.
Thank you, Madam President. I have the honor to speak on behalf of the group of least developed countries, the countries that are recognized as the most structurally vulnerable and at the furthest behind in achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. The LDC group thanks the distinguished SC candidate for the presentation and kindly requests to share her observation on the following questions. First, if elected as Secretary General, what concrete steps will you take to re-establish the United Nations as the central forum for addressing global peace and security, development and financing issues, and how will you ensure that LDCs meaningfully remain at the table to shape these decisions rather than remain on the margins? Second, what will be your strategic approach to mobilize and direct adequate, predictable, and concessional resources to LDCs, and how will you reorient the UN development system so that supporting LDCs to achieve the SDGs becomes a visible, system-wide priority at the country level? Third, in the face of ongoing financial constraints, how will you ensure that resources and dedicated support to LDCs, including to the LDC-dedicated UN mechanisms, are protected and strengthened rather than reduced? And what specific measures will you put in place to ring-fence this support from across-the-board courts? Fourth, as the UN faces unprecedented challenges from within and outside, what strategic approach will you undertake to reinvigorate the UN's development pillar to deliver transformative, system-wide support for LDCs, ensuring that the promise of the UN Charter translates into tangible, lasting progress for those furthest behind? Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Nepal on behalf of the least developed countries. Please, Ms. Espinosa.
Thank you to Nepal and to the questions on behalf of the LDCs. I think that the instrument that the LDCs have, which is the Doha agenda, is of extreme relevance. You mentioned, Excellency, that LDCs are the most vulnerable. They are the ones that are in highest needs of resources, and I would agree with you. Of course, the United Nations should serve all member states, but in particular the countries that are most in need. And the group of LDCs are have particular vulnerabilities, and the organization, the UN, and the UN system need to respond to that in supporting the implementation of the Doha agenda. You mentioned the access to concessional finance. I think it falls very well into the discussions on the reform of the international financial architecture, on the implementation of the Sevilla commitment, on the need to think about fast-tracking access and increase of fiscal space for countries in the LDC group. It translates into having a very particular assessment on what are the structural hurdles that LDCs face in achieving sustainable development goals. And when I say this, is because I am convinced that the UN development apparatus should not be one size fits all, should be demand-driven, should be able to deploy support in accordance to the principle of local first, national ownership, strengthening local capacities, and supporting with the structural hurdles as mentioned. And the structural hurdles are the means of implementation of the SDGs. More and cheaper resources, technology and transitions in technology and energy, and institutional capacity. You can count on me to champion the LDC's agenda and to ensure, as mentioned before, that the three pillars work together and in consonance. We are very good here in the House to put nice titles, One UN, Delivering as One, And I think this should be made a reality with the right incentives, with the right governance architecture in place, and in consultation with member states. You mentioned also to recenter and strengthen the role of the UN in peace and security. I hope I will have the time to answer in more detail to that very important question. Thank you again, Excellency, for your question.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Austria on behalf of the group of friends on the rule of law.
Thank you, Madam President. I have the honor to deliver this question on behalf of over 50 cross-regional members of the group of friends of the rule of law. In recent years, we have witnessed breaches of even the most fundamental provisions of the UN Charter, including the obligation of all member states to refrain in their international relations from the threat or the use of force, as well as mass atrocities committed at large scale in grave breach of international law. All this paired with the failure of the Council to take appropriate action in response. So the questions of the group of friends of the rule of law to you would be, what concrete, proactive and preventive measures would you personally pursue if elected as Secretary General to strengthen the rule of law and prevent breaches by member states of the Charter's principles and of international law? And I know you have alluded, of course, in your vision statement on this. And what specific preventive diplomacy initiatives would you launch or strengthen? I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Austria on behalf of the group of friends on the rule of law.
Thank you. Thank you, Austria, speaking on behalf of the group for the defense of the rule of law. I think that the legitimacy and the credibility of multilateralism of this House and the system has a constitution and a backbone. The constitution of the United Nations is called the UN Charter. It is this House that produces international law and should be also capable to enforce international law. You asked, Ambassador, about concrete actions and the role of the Secretary General. I mentioned before, and I will repeat this commitment, and the commitment is to serve all member states impartially, independently, and to be accountable to you as well. And I also mentioned that I will be partial, only partial to the Charter and partial to international law. The role that I see of the Secretary General, it's a role of advocacy, is a role of silent diplomacy, of using a back channel, of keeping the doors for engagement and dialogue constantly open, and be seen publicly as the person who represents the UN, but also represents the principles enshrined in the UN Charter. I see someone mention, and that's what the Charter says, the Secretary General should be the Chief Administrative Officer. And I would add to that, it has to be also the implementation officer and the advocate for international law and the UN Charter. It has to be done, of course, publicly, but sometimes often also quietly, using prudence and engagement to all member states. You ask also, Excellency, the preventive diplomacy, what are the actions? And I think that to be where a risk in early warning, to be present, to be there, to be available. I'm a full believer, as I mentioned, in shuttle diplomacy, in the physical presence of the Secretary General where it matters. And also, I believe, as I said before, in the power of of quiet diplomacy in engagement with all parties, even in the most difficult circumstances. I also believe in the persistence imperative. These issues, and I'm speaking with experience, these issues are easy to say but very difficult to do. When you say shuttle diplomacy, when you say foot on the ground and being present, engaging and opening channels and keeping channels of communication, these sometimes feel platitudes. It is not an easy issue. But I believe in persistence. I believe in not taking no for an answer. And I believe in a Secretary General that is not only present, that can also be silently working behind the scenes, and always representing the United Nations, representing the values and principles of the Charter, and upholding the importance of international law. It is the machinery we have for peaceful coexistence. And I was told
Yes. Please be sensitive to time. I now give the floor to the next distinguished representative, the representative of Estonia, on behalf of the Accountability, Coherence and Transparency Group, followed by Barbados and the next civil society organization.
Thank you, President. I would like indeed to pose two questions to candidate Espinosa on behalf of Accountability, Coherence and Transparency Group, a cross-regional group comprised of 27 small and mid-sized countries committed to a transparent and accountable UN and seeking to improve the working methods of the Security Council. First, ACT Group has developed a code of conduct regarding Security Council action against genocide, crimes against humanity, or war crimes. The Code of Conduct urges Security Council members to pledge against voting no on credible draft resolutions aimed at preventing or halting genocide, crimes against humanity, or war crimes, and encourages all Council members to take timely, decisive action during mass atrocities. The Code of Conduct is supported by 130 member states. How do you see the Secretary General's role in promoting the implementation of a Code of Conduct? And secondly, the ACT Group has highlighted the importance of ensuring the application of Article 27(3) of the UN Charter, which includes the obligation that member states of the Security Council abstain from voting if they are party to a dispute. In past years, in particular, we have seen the non-observance of this obligatory Charter provision. How can the Secretary General contribute in increasing compliance of this article in particular, and the UN Charter in general? Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Estonia on behalf of the ACT Group. Please, Ms. Espinosa.
Thank you to the question of Estonia on behalf of the ACT Group. I think my response to that is that international law, the principles of the Charter, and the decisions that are taken by member states in any of the principal organs of the UN should be complied with. The role of the Secretary General is to provide the necessary support for the implementation. And when there is tension or non-compliance, the role of the Secretary General is to deploy good offices. And in my experience, most of the time, good offices and prudent and silent diplomacy works well. But again, implementation, compliance with decisions taken in all the principal organs of the United Nations is in the hands of member states.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Barbados on behalf of the UN80 Global Group.
Thank you, Madam President, and thank you, Ms. Espinosa, for taking part in this important dialogue. I have the honor to ask this solitary question on behalf of the UN80 Global Group, a cross-regional group of countries. What specifically, Ms. Espinosa, will you do to maintain and strengthen trust between the Secretariat and member states, the Executive Office of the Secretary General, and the rest of the system as well as global confidence in the United Nations. Thank you.
Thank you. I thank the distinguished representative of Barbados on behalf of the UNAID Global Group. Please, Ms. Espinosa.
Well, thank you to Barbados, and I'm very pleased to see that there is a group of countries called the UNAID Global Group, a cross-regional group committed to advancing implementation of the UN 80 initiative. The question you asked, Excellency, is absolutely vital for the UN. How is that a Secretary General can build trust between the Secretariat and Member States, between the Office of the Secretariat and Member States, and how to build trust between the work of the UN and the outside public? So my first reaction to that is that trust cannot be declared, it has to be earned. And the way the UN is going to earn the trust of public opinion, of the outside world, of we the peoples that we are called to serve, is through impact, is through results, it's through really making sure that we are changing and improving the lives of people on the ground. And when people think about the UN, they think how many lives we have saved, how many people we have helped lift out of poverty, how many hungry people we have relieved, the deployment of the UN in places where nobody else is, the muscle that the UN has in its humanitarian infrastructure, in all the good things that the UN does every day. I would say this is the best way. And the other way is to communicate better what we do. Someone was saying before I entered this room, please do not speak in acronyms, do not speak in UN language, because it's difficult for the people that are watching us. And it is true, and I've tried my best. So the way we communicate, the way we present the work that the UN does, the way we are conscious and responsible for self-criticism is part of all of that. And how to improve the trust between the Secretariat and Member States, I will say open doors, constant engagement and communication, consultation on everything the Secretariat does, especially issues that are of concern and that are connected to the interests and the views of member states. The UN is an organization based on mandates, and perhaps the most important mandate that a Secretary General should have is to listen to member states constantly and sustainably. So no surprises from a Secretary General if you decide to select me.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the next civil society organization. I invite the Assembly to view a pre-recorded video by Bharat Maha Yukasong, the civil society organization.
Good day, Honorable Secretary General. My name is Kiwati Dibasantari. I'm a 16-year-old youth leader and youth advocate from India. I'm also the founder and president of Bharat Maha Yukasong. And my question is, as the United Nations enters the UN 81 era, amid rising conflicts, growing inequalities, and declining trust in multilateral institutions, what concrete actions would you take as the Secretary General of the United Nations that UN reforms and delivers the real results? Specifically, how would you strengthen the conflict prevention and peace building, advance sustainable development, protect human rights, and to ensure a meaningful participation of youth and civil society while making the United Nations more transparent, more accountable, and representative of today's world? Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of the civil society organization, Bharat Maha Yukasong. Please, Ms. Espinosa.
Thank you to this youth representative from India. And I think that the conversation we were having before to these very pertinent questions are really in consonance, a continuation. Basically, the question said, in face of rising conflicts, of inequalities, of the lack of trust in international institutions, what can we do? What I can say is, what can we do? We have to deliver better. We have to make sure that we respond to the needs of people on the ground, that we close the implementation gap. The UN suffers from a chronic implementation gap. Sometimes when people say Secretary General, I would say, implementation Secretary General should be perhaps the right way to call it. There was also a question on the issue of conflict prevention. And I have heard so many times the word prevention. Prevention is the best investment. It makes not only moral sense, it makes financial sense. And I think that the UN has not deployed in full its prevention capacity. My idea of establishing this hub is because I have seen firsthand that we need a very strong device on prevention. But the entire UN system should be geared towards ensuring that they deliver, they think, they plan, and they operate under the principles of prevention. I think this is absolutely vital. $1 invested in prevention is worth $7 in response. Response is costly. Response sometimes sacrifices human lives. Response is a very expensive bill in all fronts. So that's why the full emphasis in prevention. There was also a question about what to do with peacekeeping and peacebuilding. I'm sure I will hear some questions on the floor, because this is absolutely vital as we think in a renewed peace and security architecture for the organization. My time is up, and I will use any other question to speak about the importance of the participation of youth and civil society in decision-making.
I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Canada on behalf of CANS, followed by Timor-Leste and Uganda.
Madam President, Excellencies, I have the honor to address you today on behalf of Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. At a time of heightened global uncertainty and complex international challenges, the United Nations' ability to fulfill its core mandate rests on its institutional credibility, capability, and capacity. Institutional credibility requires bold and principled leadership, including the ability to deploy the Secretary General's good offices with political courage and effect. Institutional capability requires a UN that is focused on upholding all three pillars of its work and translates early warning into early action. Institutional capacity requires experienced and ethical management and realistic and fit-for-purpose mandates that sharpen effectiveness and delivery. How do you think the UN 80 initiative is working to align leadership, authority, and resources, to restore confidence in the UN and enable it to deliver results? Secondly, how would you build on the UN 80 initiative to make it more effective?
I thank the distinguished representative of Canada on behalf of CANS.
Thank you, Canada, for very, very pertinent questions, but also for your reflections about the need to strengthen institutional capacity with political courage, and to work in the three pillars of the UN as a holistic and interconnected whole. I fully agree with that. Your question on UN 80, how to build on UN 80 and make it more effective. I am following very carefully on how the UN 80 is being owned and addressed by member states. And what I see, I have to be very frank with you, I see this with very positive eyes and with optimism, because I see a great ownership from member states. These are not easy decisions. No, the minded review process requires discipline, requires generosity, requires vision. And in my opinion, the best way to look at the UN 80 is to look at as a package under the principle of form follows function and not the other way around. We need to recenter our priorities. We need to understand whether other actors do a better work. We need to identify whether the UN really adds value in a completely different world, where regional actors where national capacities with different groups and initiatives are working, and sometimes better than the UN. The UN is not the only game in town anymore, and we should have this adaptive capacity and understand the UN 80 as this evolution of the organization in the right direction. It would be, I would say, I would look at the UN 80 where how far the reform has gone. I would start and pick up from that, and of course project the UN reform to make it work and to increase the effectiveness, the impact of the organization. Two of the challenges I see is the change in the institutional culture, in the way we do business. I think this is going to be perhaps the most difficult issue, including in the Secretariat. How is that we can manage a disciplined budget? How is that we can think about the budgetary implications of the mandates that we establish? And how is that we organize the system so it responds more to the priorities set by member states? So definitely I am watching carefully, and I'm committed to continue and deepen the implementation of the UN 80, which is, in my view, a very good start.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Timor-Leste on behalf of the group of Portuguese-speaking countries, followed by Uganda and Sweden.
Excellency, Ms. Maria Fernanda Espinosa, thank you for your briefing. I have the honor of speaking on behalf of the community of Portuguese-speaking countries. The CPLP spans 4 continents and is home to more than 280 million people, united by a common language, shared heritage, and strong cultural ties. We attach great importance to the United Nations and to effective multilateral cooperation. As a community whose members are connected by the ocean across 4 continents, the CPLP views ocean governance as an issue that cuts across sustainable development, food security, climate action, and international cooperation. How would you position the ocean within the United Nations agenda and advance concrete action in areas such as implementation of the BBNG agreement, combating illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing, and mobilizing financing for a sustainable blue economy? Thank you, Madam.
I thank the distinguished representative of Timor-Leste on behalf of the group of Portuguese-speaking countries. Please, Ms. Espinosa.
Thank you to Timor-Leste on behalf of the Lusophone countries. Your question about the blue economy, the importance of oceans, I think it's reflected in the 3 ocean conferences that the UN has had in a very short period of time. It means that the discussion about the future of oceans is at the center, and it's provided with a great importance. What I can say is that, again, I would like to bring my experience as president of the Governing Council of the Galapagos Islands. And I can tell you that coastal countries, countries that depend very much on the ocean for their development, both have the responsibility of protecting the ocean. Unfortunately, is I see oceans as the microcosm of the things that gives us optimism as a source and a potential of development, but also as a challenge. No? The challenges in oceans are that the triple crisis, environmental crisis that we suffer, materialize in ocean ecosystems. The climate crisis, the pollution crisis, the extinction crisis, they all come together in ocean. So we have a responsibility as an international community to address these issues. You mentioned the issue of illegal activity in oceans. This is a very concerning issue. I think the international community should mobilize, we should use the tools that we have in hand, UNODC and other tools, because illegal activities in oceans are increasing. I come also from a region where we see that is not only illegal fishing, other illegal activities, starting with human trafficking, with drug trafficking. So I think that it is important that we come together to address the issues, the very dangerous issue of illegal activity in ocean. In terms of the potential and sustainable use of oceans and the blue economy, the opportunities are enormous. As Secretary General, I will ensure that I work hand in hand with coastal and ocean countries to make sure that the ocean is a source of development and prosperity, either by tourism or biotechnology or sustainable use of ocean resources. The potential is huge. The untapped potential of oceans is enormous, and you can count on me to place the blue economy and the future of oceans at the center of the sustainable development and the peace and security agenda. Yeah.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Uganda on behalf of the Non-Aligned Movement, followed by Romania and the next civil society organization.
I speak on behalf of the 121 member states of the Non-Aligned Movement, NAM. NAM affirms the role of the United Nations in promoting multilateralism and international cooperation, which are key for addressing global challenges that impact the member states of the movement. The Declaration on the Right to Development was adopted by the United Nations General Assembly in 1986. That's almost 40 years ago. What is your position on the right to development, and how would you advance its implementation within the United Nations system? How would you assess the impact of unilateral coercive measures on the ability of affected developing countries to achieve sustainable development goals and fully implement the 2030 agenda? What concrete actions would you promote in your capacity as Secretary General to strengthen the role of the United Nations in opposing such illegal measures that violate the UN Charter? And how would you argue for the elimination and promote mechanisms to prevent their application? Last but not least, considering the importance of safeguarding the full independence, impartiality, and institutional integrity of the Secretariat, what measures would you propose to ensure that these principles are reflected in the equitable and effective support to all member states' representation in the discharge of their responsibilities? I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Uganda on behalf of the Non-Aligned Movement. Please, Ms. Espinosa.
Well, thank you to Uganda on behalf of the Non-Aligned Movement. First of all, on the right to development, you said it well. It's a resolution that has 40 years. That I would say it's part of the human rights architecture that member states have developed. just to remind ourselves that human rights are universal, indivisible, non-selective, and every right is important. I think that we are, as humanity, we have the responsibility to comply with the two covenants, the covenant on economic and social rights, and the covenant on civic and political rights together. And of course, the right to development is part of that whole. Regarding unilateral coercive measures, my role as Secretary General would not be there to perhaps take sides in the debates or arbitrate, but to uphold the Charter, to uphold international law and the mandates entrusted to the organization and the Secretariat by Member States. The role of the Secretary General is and has to be, it's part of the job description, to protect people and to maintain diplomatic channels always open. Regarding the independence, impartiality of the UN staff, I will be a strong defender of the respect for Article 100 of the Charter. You can be assured, Excellency.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the first speaker on behalf of national member states or national capacity. So please be aware that the time limit is 2 minutes for the questions and also 2 minutes for the answers. I really have to be sharp on that one again, because assuring that we have the same terms for every candidate here at the podium, and maybe also reminding those who ask questions, if there are multiple questions in one 2-minute statement, it's really hard to answer if you're not just saying yes or no to the question. So please be aware of that. So as the first speaker, I would give the floor to the distinguished representative of Romania, followed by the next civil society organization, and Peru and Angola.
Thank you very much, Madam President. And the fact that we have the first national statement after more than 2 hours and 15 minutes, it's a reflection for us member states, probably in the revitalization process from the next session.
The others are also member states, before.
Of course, absolutely. No, I simply wanted, I will use less than 2 minutes. I think, Mrs. Espinosa, you addressed a number of questions. What is important? You also referred to the relationship between the General Assembly and Security Council, especially on matters related to peace and security. What is important for us as member states, as we are looking in the environment under which we operate, there is undeniably an erosion of trust in the United Nations and the multilateral system. The Secretary General will play its role, member states as well. I would be very much interested to see how you look at the primary factors of this erosion and whether you would employ more the secretary hat or the general hat. You talked about it in the opening statement. And the other point is not a second question, but it's also linked to the overall state of affairs in the United Nations, is the gap between commitments that we undertake as member states and the implementation. Thank you very much.
Thank the distinguished representative of Romania. Please, Ms. Espinosa.
Well, thank you to Romania, and welcome to the opportunity for individual member states to address this assembly. You touch on very important issues about the role of the Secretary General in rebuilding trust and keeping channels of communication constantly open. I would say it's very easy to use phrases that sound nice and good, no? And I think it's important, to think that the renewal of leadership sometimes brings oxygen to the House. It allows to re-engage member states, to have new channels of communication, to bring together the different organs of the House to speak to each other, to coordinate the work, I remember when I was president of the General Assembly, I established this modality, two modalities. One called, some might remember, the old-timers in the House, but I called the Minga Dialogues, which I organized every morning, very early in the morning, and I brought member states together to discuss difficult issues when I saw that there was division and tension in the House. So dialogue is irreplaceable. This being seen as this independent, honest broker in the House is extremely valuable and important. No, you also mentioned, Excellency, the issue of the implementation gap and in what to do about that. I think this is a shared responsibility in the mandates that we produce and the ability that we collectively have to deliver on them. So I think that the mandate review process is going to help us in this reflection and as we continue to implement the UN process. I said I will be implementation Secretary General, working hand in hand with all of you, with member states.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the next civil society organization here present in the room, Instituto IGARAP. Please, you have the floor.
Good afternoon. I'm Giovanna Quayle, speaking on behalf of the IGARAP Institute, and our work is guided by a vision of a safer, more just, and climate-resilient future in which people and nature thrive together. Yet, as climate change, biodiversity loss, and ecosystem degradation intensify, global governance frameworks remain fragmented, insufficiently coordinated, and too often fail to reflect the interconnected nature of this crisis, particularly for countries and communities already facing the greatest impacts. So my question is, what concrete reforms would you prioritize to strengthen the UN's leadership on climate action, while better aligning it with nature protection? Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of the civil society. Please, Ms. Espinosa, you have the floor.
Thank you to the IGARAP Institute for the question. And my answer to that would be, I think that the responsibility of a Secretary General is to ensure better coordination, better integration, and better capacity to respond jointly to the issue of the environmental crisis. In here, I'm speaking from the experience more on the side of member states. I'm not speaking only about climate, but the issue for our countries is how we separate when we produce policy, when we prioritize investment, when we want to do action that connects environment and development. We have to report back to the three main conventions, to the three Rio conventions in separate tracks. The counterparts in the UN are different counterparts. There are more than 200 multilateral environmental agreements that countries that have subscribed them have to report back on them. So often, and when I was Minister of Heritage, I experienced that. We spend so much energy and resources reporting back than what we invested in terms of designing the right policies, planning accordingly, and doing the work we needed to do. Your question is about how to strengthen UN leadership. I think the best way we can do, and as a Secretary General, is to organize the House together. No, if you track which of the programs and agencies do climate change, in what ways they deliver, what is the value added they bring, what are the agencies that work on forests, what are the agencies that work on oceans, how they come together, how they plan together, and how they provide the support needed to member states. I think we really need to rethink creatively in consultation with member states, how is that we simplify the work of the UN Secretariat, the UN system, in providing the support that countries need to really implement and deliver on their environmental commitments. The issue of the climate leadership of the UN, I think that we have to acknowledge that the UN has had a loud voice on this field. But we really have to rethink the environmental governance within the UN Secretariat, and that would be my responsibility as Secretary General, to make sure that we make the life of member states easier, and we are really in support of their commitments. My time is up.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Peru, followed by Angola and the United Kingdom.
Gracias.
Thank you, Madam President. At the outset, distinguished Ambassador Espinosa, we convey the greetings of Peru and a warm welcome to you. Peru participates in this dialogue with the firm commitment to strengthen the UN to, with cooperation, address the emerging challenges of humanity. Inspired by the legacy of Ambassador Javier Pérez de Cuellar, the only UN ex-Secretary General from Latin America and the Caribbean, we reaffirm the importance of leadership that is able to ensure consensus in the current international context marked by increasing complexity, volatility, and uncertainty. Peru, in addition to what has been mentioned by the mission of Korea, together with the group of countries and the ACT, would like to ask the following three countries. What specific actions will you take to recover the effective leadership and dialogue role for the Secretary General to contribute both to preventing and resolving major armed conflicts and also to responding to emerging threats and challenges to peace and security, such as transnational organized crime and AI governance? What is your view regarding the role that Latin America and the Caribbean should and can play in promoting and defending the principles of the UN Charter? How do you imagine revigorizing the relationship between the UN and Bretton Woods organizations, and how would you work with them more closely on development and on implementing the SDG agenda? Thank you.
Thank you. I thank the distinguished representative of Peru. Please, Ms. Espinosa.
Well, thank you very much, Your Excellency. Thank you very much to Peru for that question. And I hope to be able to live up to the expectations and the standards of Ambassador Pérez de Cuellar that we all remember with great admiration due to the legacy that he left in this House. Now, on your first question on the organization's role in peace and security, and leadership in peace and security, I think that we've heard from states about how we need to recover this active role for the organization as a peacemaker, and how this is key to all processes, not only conflict prevention, but also mediation processes and also processes to provide support to garner lasting peace. I think that the world has changed. The Secretary General firstly has to be seen, has to be present, and I think that they have to learn to adapt their role, firstly, in line with the mandate conferred by states, particularly the Security Council. But humanity has to know that the representative of the United States, of the United Nations, will always be there wherever it is needed. Sometimes they need to take a leading role, and sometimes they need to take a supportive role. And I think that the UN, in particular the Secretariat, has to adapt to these new conditions. We've seen mediation efforts that have been successful, are worth recognizing, from groups of countries and individual countries. And this morning we had some good news, for instance, on the signing of an agreement between Iran and the United States through the mediation of several individual countries. There, the UN has to find its place, has to look at how it can have a seat at the table, how it can raise its profile, and it can show the necessary muscle and infrastructure to achieve lasting peace. So I'm already running out of time. Now, in terms of the UN's relationship with Bretton Woods institutions, I think that's extremely important. We've heard from the G77 and all of the developing countries about, and the different groups, that what they need is international financial architecture that meets their needs and that gives them a voice and allows them a role in decision making. I don't have any more time, but I will try to come back to your excellent questions, Your Excellency.
Thank you. We have 10 more speakers, so if everybody stays quite short, and please, if you stay within the 2 minutes, otherwise I have to implement the microphone cutoff at this stage. We can hear all of them. Next speaker on the list is Angola, followed by the Russian Federation and the Maldives.
No, thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Ambassador Espinosa, for presenting your vision statement. We would like to pose the following questions. First, your candidacy was announced after 4 other candidates had already participated in similar informal dialogues. What prompted your decision to enter the race at this stage? More importantly, what specific experience, leadership qualities, or vision do you bring that distinguish you from the candidates who have already presented themselves? And what would make you the strongest choice for this position? Second, at this time of growing geopolitical tensions, declining trust among member states, and increasing challenges to multilateral cooperation, how would you use the authority and good offices of the Secretary General to foster dialogue, strengthen confidence building, and advance practical solutions among divided stakeholders? Could you provide a concrete example of how your experience has prepared you for such a role? I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Angola. Please, Ms. Espinosa.
Thank you for your questions, Excellency. You're asking about why I came. I'm a newcomer. Since there are no deadlines to present candidacies, we know that well. I mentioned during my opening statement that before taking the decision, in accepting the invitation of many countries that were saying, why don't you put your name forward? I want to be very candid here. I wanted to listen to member states. And many of you know that I visit you, I spoke to you here and in capitals to do a round of consultations to see if they believe that there was space for more options. And after listening, after having a serious conversation to several countries, and after accepting the very generous invitation of a country that champions multilateralism and has contributed so much to this House, Antigua and Barbuda, I decided to take the challenge and to do everything in my power to have the honor to serve this House. But it was about listening, about gathering the expectations from member states and taking a decision that was a responsible decision, of course. What are the qualities that I bring to the House? I'm going to say 30 years of experience of being a multilateralist from my different positions. You have received my CV, but above all, you have seen me in action. Many of you have seen me in action. I am a person that is a bridge builder, that can be impartial, serve all countries equally, being seen as impartial, independent, able to bring even the hardest positions together. You mentioned about giving a concrete example. In very short period of time, being able to agree on 2 successive ceasefires between the ELN and Colombia, having been able to reform entirely the armed forces of my country, which is a very big, strong, and important institution of my country. So I'm I have a track record to be a reformist and to be an impact-driven leader. And I have to end here, but thank you, Excellency, for your questions.
I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Russian Federation, followed by the Maldives and the civil society organization.
Thank you, Madam President. The Russian Federation believes it's necessary to select the best candidate, the candidate who sticks to the highest standards of competency, professionalism, and upholds the Charter as a whole. Ms. Espinosa, we have the following question for you. The SG should be guided. Should the SG be guided by non-consensus GA resolutions which stray beyond the Charter? This applies in particular to issues under the consideration of the Security Council. Do you believe that Charter principles can be ranked? Can the Secretariat interpret the Charter of the organization as the current SG is doing? Who takes it upon himself to decide in which instances the principle of self-determination is key and in which cases it's territorial integrity that takes precedence? I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of the Russian Federation. I give the floor to Ms. Espinosa.
Well, thank you. Thank you to the Russian Federation for this very important question. I think that the Charter must be upheld as a whole, as a political and normative package. I don't think that the Secretary General has to rank the principles or establish a hierarchy among them. So I strongly believe that the purposes and principles of the Charter were designed to really operate together as a part of a coherent, as mentioned, legal and political framework. The role of the Secretary General is therefore not to determine which principle is more important, but to support their consistent implementation in accordance with the Charter.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Maldives.
Thank you, Madam President. Your Excellency, your vision calls for disciplined reform and warns against cosmetic change. What would be the clearest early signal in management terms that reform under your leadership is strengthening accountability and coherence rather than simply reorganizing structures? And I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representatives of the Maldives. Please, Ms. Espinosa.
Well, I thank you very much for that question, because I spoke about a discipline in budgets. I spoke about accountability. And this gives me opportunity to speak about accountability. Some of you have said and asked, how is that we regain trust? And one of the means to regain trust is through accountability. And here I have to say that I have been doing an analysis of the accountability infrastructure of the UN and looking at the role of the Joint Inspection Unit, at the role of the Board of Auditors, of the Internal Oversight Office, of the role of oversight that governing bodies of the programs and agencies have. And I really believe that we really need to have a coherent package of accountability within the Secretariat. No, there are mechanisms that are independent, like the Board of Auditors, for example. The Joint Inspection Unit is also an independent body, but I think that we need to have a coherent toolbox of accountability where the Secretariat is constantly and permanently accountable to the member states, and that within the Secretariat there are fully fledged accountability mechanisms. And I've been looking at the work of the Internal Oversight Office, and there is lots of adjustments to do. Accountability has to be a built-in, constant, permanent part of the institutional culture. I'm working on that. I have to say I'm also working on a financing compact for the UN to have a sustainable, predictable budget, working hand in hand with member states. I mentioned, to use the new leadership to really sit down with member states and discuss seriously about how to ensure a sustainable, responsible, a disciplined budget for the organization. And this is really not cosmetic, is a change in the institutional culture, which is not easy to do, but I am ready to embark in this endeavor with your support.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the last civil society organization, Impact Compact. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you and good afternoon. I'm Behnur Behtar, and as a college student, I'm mindful that millions of girls around the world are still denied access to education and opportunities. I'm reminded every day that education is more than just access to a classroom. It is dignity, opportunity, and the freedom to imagine a future. Yet for millions of girls around the world, that future continues to be shaped by conflict, discrimination, displacement, and restrictions that limit their ability to learn, grow, and reach their full potential. So if education is both a fundamental human right and the foundation of sustainable development, what responsibility should the United Nations have when girls are systematically denied that right? And how would you, as Secretary General,
Thank you very much. Not left behind. I thank the civil society representative of Impact Compact. Please, Ms. Espinosa.
Well, thank you to Impact Compact, and thank you for bringing the rights of girls to the conversation and the right of girls to education. There are many commitments, many international human rights treaty bodies that address this issue. It is about implementation. It is about keeping the right to education and girls' education at the center. I agree with you that this is a fundamental issue of dignity and rights. And it's not only access to schools, it is about dignity, equal opportunity. If we look at, let me give you just one example. If you look at the huge digital gap, more than 30% of the world is offline. And the majority of the people offline in the world is basically women and girls. And that is very much connected to the discrimination you were talking about. The UN has that responsibility. As Secretary General, the Secretariat of the UN will put that, of course, as a matter of priority.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Cuba, followed by Indonesia and the Philippines.
Gracias, señora. Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, distinguished Maria Fernanda Espinosa Garces, Cuba is grateful for this opportunity for this interactive dialogue. We align ourselves with the statement delivered by the G77, the NAM, IOSIS as well, and we'd like to ask the following questions in our national capacity. Firstly, what structural reforms would you support to transform the international financial system into a fairer, more inclusive and more representative system that effectively meets the needs and priorities of developing countries, including access to financing, debt relief, and a greater voice and participation in decision-making? Secondly, in light of the increasing escalation of conflicts and the proliferation of belligerent narratives, what action would you take within the Secretary General's office to promote a culture of peace, the peaceful settlement of disputes, and respect for the principle of the non-use of force? Thank you.
Muchas gracias. I now give the floor to Ms. Espinosa and thank the distinguished representative of Cuba.
Thank you very much for the question from Cuba. Now, on structural reforms, I was saying at the beginning that developing countries need three things to be able to implement their commitments in terms of sustainable development. One, they need access to resources, they need technology transfer, they need energy, and they need to build their institutional capacities. And that is what the UN system needs to respond to. Now, one of the structural issues that is most hampering this is the current design of the international financial system. Specifically, what we're talking about here is debt restructuring mechanisms. We know that 3.4 billion people live in countries that implement more in debt relief than pay more for debt relief than in educational health. So there's an issue here of regulation to restructure all of this. Secondly, they need access to concessional funds, particularly for the most vulnerable countries. There are mechanisms such as debt sustainability analyses that do not take into account the specific vulnerabilities of certain countries and groups of countries, such as small island developing states. Now, what is the UN's role? The UN isn't a bank, but it is the most suitable platform. It has the most information. It has seen political commitments such as the Seville commitment to bring this discussion here, to inform the discussion, and to feed into decision making that can benefit countries while they meet their development goals. Now, the question that you asked, Excellency, on how to build a culture of peace, this is a fundamental role for the UN as an organization, but in particular, it is also the fundamental role of the Secretary General as the major ambassador for peace at the global level. Peace is not only something that it can be looked at ahead, it is something that can be forged. It is through combating extreme poverty, inequalities, ensuring energy for the many people who do not have access to energy. That's what it means to build a culture of peace.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Indonesia, followed by the Philippines and Djibouti.
Thank you, Madam President. Excellency, Ms. Espinosa, we thank you for sharing your vision, and we also take note of your vision for a UN that restores trust and delivers results. Indonesia would like to pose the following questions. First, with multilateralism currently under increasing strain, how will you overcome persistent resistance to change, especially when there is a need for more fundamental recalibration to the UN system? Second, how do you intend to revitalize the UN's role as the prominent forum for open dialogue among leaders to foster mutual understanding and solidarity? And please provide the concrete examples. Third, if elected, how do you envision strengthening meaningful youth participation in shaping global norms and contributing to the forward-looking and future-ready multilateral solutions? We look forward to your insights. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Indonesia. Please, Ms. Espinosa.
Thank you, Indonesia, for your questions. You mentioned the resistance to change in the face of a reform that is not only necessary but is inevitable. I mentioned that you can improve, for example, the way the UN does procurement. You can put together all the muscle of the UN in terms of that data management and locate that in Valencia, which is the very concrete case. No, you can do all of that, but if the institutional culture doesn't change, it's going to be very difficult to ensure that the transformations that the UN needs to be more effective, more impact-oriented, slimmer, are not going to be able to be sustained in the long term. So we need to work together, member states, the Secretariat, the new Secretary General, work together to ensure that the transformations and the changes that are going to happen and are happening today are really owned by everybody, including the UN staff. I haven't had the time to just a few words of gratitude for the resilience, the mission-oriented and the committed staff of the United Nations. You spoke about, your question about youth participation, absolutely vital. For me, the participation of youth is not just to tick the box. I have to say, you will see my office, the Office of the Secretary General, is going to also be an intergenerational office. I trust fully the creativity, the innovation, and the energy of young talent. And of course, the UN has now a UN office. I will be working hand in hand with the UN office, for example, to think about a new pact for jobs for young people in the future.
I thank you. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Philippines, followed by Djibouti and Ukraine.
Thank you, Madam President, and thank you, Madam Espinosa. As chair of the like-minded group for middle-income countries, the Philippines would like to inquire how you believe the UN's support to middle-income countries can be improved, considering that the majority of the world's poor continue to live in middle-income countries. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of the Philippines. Please, Ms. Espinosa.
I really would like to thank the Philippines for the question, because I come from a middle-income country. I have served government as a public servant for many years. I know exactly what the challenges are. The issue of graduation, the issue of non-access to concessional funding. I think the effort that the House is doing to think about beyond GDP and looking at other vulnerabilities and specific needs, this double trap of middle-income countries, I fully relate to that. I understand what the problems are, and you will count on a Secretary General that really comes from a middle-income country, like the vast majority of the people in the world. So I have no time to go into the details, but I fully understand the agenda. I'm committed to bring the agenda to the center of the work we do, and to connect the middle-income agenda with the development agenda. Thank you.
Thank you. We have 15 minutes left, and if we continue as this, we can hear all the speakers as the last times as well. We started a couple of minutes of late, so this is the minutes we add after 6, but we will end here at 6:08 sharp. As the next speaker, I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Djibouti, and we will hear afterwards Ukraine and Namibia. Also the opportunity to finalize then the interactive dialogues. Djibouti, please, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. In the interest of time, I'll go straight to the questions. As Secretary General, Madam Espinosa, how would you mobilize the United Nations system, including agencies such as ILO, UNDP, UNCTAD, and international financial institutions around a common and measurable global jobs agenda aimed at creating opportunities for youth, women, and entrepreneurs in developing countries? Second, the SG relies on the vital work done by special envoys and SRSGs. In your view, what institutional ecosystem, including political support, financing, analytical capacity, regional partnerships, and coordination with member states is necessary to ensure that special envoys can deliver meaningful and measurable impacts? And last but not least, you emphasized the importance of communication in one of your answers to an earlier question. How do you believe your background as a poet will shape your leadership style as SG? And in what ways will you use the power of narrative in helping the UN reconnect with people and inspire collective action? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I thank the distinguished representative of Djibouti, also bringing a smile to everybody's face. Please, Ms. Espinosa.
Into my face, certainly. Thank you to Djibouti for such important questions. You mentioned the jobs agenda. This is absolutely central for the future of development. When I look at Africa and the demographic dividend of Africa, when I look at the future of young people, when I look at the impact of artificial intelligence, I strongly believe that we really need to be serious about aligning the UN system as they support countries and they work hand in hand for a sort of a new jobs compact that we have to co-create. This is an absolutely vital issue, and very happy to align the UN system in support of member states on this very important issue. The issue of financing special envoys and SRSGs, I think it's part of the certainty, the discipline of a new budget for the UN. Of course, I have been looking at the job descriptions of the special envoys and the SRSGs. I think that they have a very important role to play, of course, but I think we need to reassess what we actually need and what is also the built-in capacity that the UN has in-house. And you will see, a Secretary General that is out there, that is active, and perhaps in some cases there is no need for a special envoy if the Secretary General herself can play that role. But of course, financing is an important issue. And now, if you allow me, because I really need to respond to the question of being a poet. And sometimes people say to be a poet, it's a passe-temps, it's a hobby. For me, to be a poet is the way I look at the world, the way I communicate and engage with people, the way I honor words and the power of words and narrative. And I think this is something that I can bring to the UN to ensure that we communicate better, that we engage better, in that we bring with the peoples as co-responsible for the work that the UN does. This is very much part of the building trust that we're talking about.
Thank you. I now give the floor first to Ukraine and then to Namibia as the final speakers of today. And this would give you also the opportunity within these answers to summarize for today's interactive dialogue. Please, the distinguished representative of Ukraine, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President, and thank you, Madam Espinosa, for sharing your vision and priorities. Just last night, Russia launched a massive attack on Ukraine, striking several cities, including the capital Kiev, where the Kiev-Pechersk Lavra, a UNESCO World Heritage monastery complex, was set on fire and significantly damaged. At least 11 people were killed and more than 50 injured. We once again see Russia, a permanent member of the UN Security Council, instead of upholding the Council's core mandate to maintain international peace and security, deliberately violating international law, killing civilians, and destroying invaluable cultural heritage. Russia's actions must be stopped and Russia must be held accountable. So, my question is, how do you plan to utilize the mandate of the Secretary General, including by engagement with the General Assembly, to advance diplomatic efforts to end Russia's aggression against Ukraine, promote a comprehensive, just and lasting peace, and at the same time strengthen accountability for violation of international law committed by Russia during its war of aggression against Ukraine? Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Ukraine. Please, Ms. Espinosa.
Thank you to Ukraine. I think that new leadership in the House can really help create new momentum for finding common ground for the peaceful resolution of conflicts, including Ukraine. I think the SG, the Secretary General, must uphold the Charter, must keep channels for dialogue open, must deploy her good offices and capacity as a truly an honest broker when required. The Secretary General has the responsibility to abide and defend international law and the Charter.
I thank Ms. Espinosa, and as the final speaker of today, I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Namibia.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam Espinosa, in September 2024, world leaders adopted the most wide-ranging international agreement in many years, namely the Pact for the Future, a notable agreement that has reinvigorated the multilateral system and has given direction in a number of important global multilateral thematic issues. My questions are as follows. 1, what is your vision to implementing the Pact for the Future, and how best can the Secretariat support Member States in its implementation ahead of the 2028 review of the Pact, particularly the reform of the international financial architecture, which is at the core of denying the much-needed funding for developing countries? 2, it is commonly held that when women lead, peace follows. And in the true spirit of the Women, Peace and Security agenda, what advantage would you as a woman be bringing in addressing global hotspots that are plaguing the world, particularly in Gaza and Sudan? And 3, and the last question is, what would you do differently from the current Secretary General in response to today's geopolitical situation? I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Namibia. Please, Ms. Espinosa, answering the question and also opportunity to sum up.
The Pact of the Future, I think, as mentioned before, it is a roadmap for a reform of the United Nations. It should go hand in hand with the efforts under UN80. And of course, the Secretariat has the responsibility, because it was adopted by Member States, has the responsibility to support Member States as they deliver their implementation. There are parts of the Pact of the Future that fall directly into the responsibility of the Secretary General, and you can count that I will take that seriously, because it is a mandate from Member States, and I will see the review a process in 2028 as a moment to really assess progress, and I hope that we will celebrate the progress then. The role of the Secretariat in support of the reform of the international financial architecture, I have mentioned how important this is for developing countries. This is at the core also of Agenda 2063, which it's the twin agenda with Agenda 2030, but with a wider horizon. The UN has a critical role to play as an information and analysis provider, as a global platform, as a place for legitimacy and political traction. So we will pursue that agenda seriously, also to comply with the Sevilla commitment and its action agenda. Your question about the Women, Peace and Security agenda, as former Minister of Defense, you might understand that this is absolutely central in the peace and security agenda of the organization. You also asked about the issue of prevention. I'm running out of time, but of course, no, I think you talk prevention, women, peace, and the Women, Peace and Security agenda. Oh, the qualities of the Secretary General that you mentioned. No, I would say I already mentioned what I bring in a very candid way. No, I bring the experience, I bring the energy, I bring my commitment and knowledge about the system. And also, I bring my commitment and my understanding of what public service means. Public service does not mean personal entitlement. It's a public trust.
Thank you. We have come to the end of the interactive dialogue. I would like to thank you, Ms. Espinosa, and all member states, all participants for their valuable contributions. After receiving this afternoon another nomination for a new candidate for the position of the next Secretary General, and as announced in my letter dated June 1st, that we would schedule additional dialogues in the week of June 15th in case of additional candidates, if they would emerge, I would like to announce that the interactive dialogue with Ms. Caroline Rodriguez-Burkett will take place this Thursday, June 18th, 2026 at 10 a.m. in this chamber.